BJU Press Homeschool is the premier sponsor of the Culture Proof podcast. Did you know that homeschoolers are a threat to a secular culture? It's true. For a society that envisions public education as the means by which it will indoctrinate future generations, destroy the proliferation of the gospel, and disintegrate the republic, homeschoolers are de facto revolutionaries. But all homeschooling is not created equal. What makes your kid's education Christian is not the fact that you are one. This is why we trust BJU Press Homeschool to help us seamlessly disciple our children, even in their core subjects. We don't want a secular education that uses Bible verses as frosting. We want the knowledge of God preserved at every phase of what our kids are taught. Consider BJU Press Homeschool for all of your homeschooling needs. We trust them to back us as we grow the resistance. You can too. Visit bjupress.com today. That's bjupress.com.
Yeah, definitely. And when you see these things, man, you got to also think from a spiritual standpoint. This is where the world is. This is sin makes you stupid. These type of things that we're talking about, because for there to even be a thought that this is okay in the minds of people, it shows that there's a spirit of stupor that's upon the world.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
countries, but the world, because there's a collective thought of debauchery.
Yep.
And we have to stand as Christians, even when we look at our politics and say morality matters.
Yeah.
Morality matters.
Thanks for checking out Culture Proof. I'm Miki.
And I'm Will.
And today we are talking about the world that they want to live in and why we as believers, we've got to keep talking about the perilous times. I know that, we can get to the place where we're kind of exhausted and talking about the last days and what it would look like. And I think in some ways we think the perilous times and the last days, that's just in America, right? But it's in the world that we would see these things happening. And I think some of the stories that we have today, while we have to issue a disclaimer because they're not suitable for younger ears, it's important to understand the time that we're living in and how we can be equipped, and then also equip our offspring so that they're not caught off guard by the utter sinfulness of the world that we live in.
Yeah.
I mean, because the world is utterly sinful.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely so. And it's our responsibility to equip them and train them up. And so it's not a thing that we can do to just hide everything from them. But and the wisdom of God that he gives us to be able to present these issues and what's going on and give them the biblical response. What does the Bible say about the times that we're living in? Because the truth of it is they're going to be living in a time, they're living in a time and going to be living in a time that's going to require of them to understand what the word of God is saying. And so as parents, and as ministers and teachers, we have to take seriously that we're handing down the truth of God to our next generation.
Yeah, we're going to get into that. Before we do, we want to say thank you to our premier sponsor, BJU Press Homeschool. We trust BJU Press Homeschool to help us as we prepare our kids for the possibilities, whatever it is that the Lord calls them to. We trust that they're going to be ready. One, because we've submitted to the Lordship of Christ and we've entrusted our kids to him. And two, because we've obeyed him in educating them at home. We were thoroughly convicted that this is something the Lord called us to do. And we are grateful for BJU Press Homeschool that we trust to not undercut what we are trying to do in the lives of our kids. That is train, disciple, and equip them to live in this world. We think that you'll appreciate what BJU Press Homeschool has to offer. Right now is the best time to find out. You can go to bjupresshomeschool.com and you can use our promo code B2H10. That's back to homeschool 10. So B2H10 when you go to bjupresshomeschool.com, and you can save 10% off your purchase. Kick the year off right and set yourself up for a perfect 10.
Perfect 10. I like that.
Perfect 10 by using our promo code B2H10. When you go to bjupresshomeschool.com, you will prepare your kids for the possibilities, and BJU Press Homeschool wants to come alongside you and help you do just that. All right, Will the Great. So talking about the type of world that they want to live in, and why we've got to continue talking about the perilous times that we're in. It's interesting because we are kind of heavy into the political conversation. I think Christians need to show up and be a part of it. I don't think, and we already talked about this, I don't think we need to talk in terms of the social issues that can seem outdated or seem like we shouldn't be talking about those anymore.
Yeah.
I think we need to continue talking about what is moral, right? And how we keep people, I guess, their feet held to the fire of things that they've said in the past and positions we know they have, even when they try to move away from those positions. I think that's something of what people are seeing with Kamala Harris, that she is kind of slowly walking back a lot of her radical positions. But I think it's important for us to know what she really wants. And in the world, there is a spirit of this age. And I know it's hard for people to think in these terms because we are so natural in our thinking, but God has invited us by way of revelation to know that the things that we are battling are not just natural. So when we see people kind of at one time leading out with a radical ideology, that there are no distinctions between male and female, that there are no distinctions between borders, that there are no states, there are no, that there is just one world, just one sort of like just sex, which would be every sex, whatever you want, which means that there are no distinctions,
right.
Among other things. I think it's important for us to be reminded of that and what the implications of those positions are.
Yes.
And so I wanted to play this clip. This is Kamala Harris, and we didn't get to this on our last podcast recording, but this is Kamala Harris being interviewed by what is obviously a mentally confused man on a trans sort of platform. And she's talking about just kind of touting her progress as a California attorney general and what she did for those who were mentally confused in the prison system. And we want to play this clip, and then we want to talk about what we see happening on a larger scale, because this is what is celebrated and this is what is desired, that there would be normalized confusion even in our prison system. And we'll talk about what the implications of that are outside of the prison population as well. But here's Kamala Harris talking about what she's good at, which is normalizing confusion and supporting it.
General, I learned that the California Department of Corrections, which was a client of mine, I didn't get to choose my clients.
Right, a client of the Attorney General.
A client of the Attorney General, right. Of the Office of Attorney General, that they were standing in the way of surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. And there was a specific case. And when I learned about the case, I worked behind the scenes to not only make sure that that transgender woman got the services she was deserving. So it wasn't only about that case. I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care that they desired and need. And I believe it was not only, I know it was historic in California, but I believe actually it may have been one of the first, if not the first in the country, where I pushed for that policy in a Department of Corrections.
Okay, so why is that important? Because she's pushing the normalization of gender confusion in the prison system in California. And that has had far-reaching consequences or far-reaching effects around the country. And I was reading an article, and this article is from the Daily Mail, looking at the rise of sexual assault in the prison system because of normalizing gender confusion. And I thought, when you start talking about, what your record is and what you should be proud of, the question is, should you really be proud of allowing men, reducing the standards of protecting women, even though they're in a prison environment, reducing the standards of protecting women and putting them in a general population with men, some of them who have violent criminal histories, some of them, and as I'm going to point out in this Daily Mail story, some of them violently attacking women. So they enter the female population because they identify as female, but there have been no changes to their anatomy. And so they enter into the population. They then violently attack these women, some of them impregnating the prisoners, the other female prisoners. And I don't know if I should say the other, but impregnating female prisoners, because we're
Right.
talking about men
Yeah.
going into the female population. And this is something that Kamala Harris is saying she's very proud of.
Yeah, she's proud of it, and she's proud that it was historic. And
Yeah.
she's proud that, maybe some other states have taken on what she has promoted.
Mhm.
It's wicked. It's wicked. And when you see what's happening, some people may turn, their face from it to say, well, that's in the prison. They kind of, no, these people are still human.
Right.
And what you're doing, that's abusive, And so I think if this is a person right here who's running for president, and if she's trying to tone down some of that now, it's only politics, y'all.
That's right.
There's nothing's going to change. If she gets into office, she's going to ramp that thing back up.
That's right.
And so I think believers, we have to be very wise and discerning and not be pulled in by what the news media try to paint as a picture of, both candidates.
Mhm.
Really, we have to have discernment and understand, what's really going on, because the tamping down of certain policies to win the favor of certain groups is just what they do
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
politicians. And so we have to be wise concerning this.
And so look at some of the data that's out just from about a year and a half ago, looking at what's happening in the prison system. The Daily Mail ran a story where women's rights groups are warning of even more male to female trans detainees serving time in women's prisons, despite the rising incidence of rape and other
Wow.
horrors and what were once women only cell blocks. And so again, let's go back to what is being celebrated as like a victory. I did this. I
Right.
wanted to support people's identities. I wanted to make it easier for them to live out what they feel they are
Mm.
in the prison system. So not only do you have taxpayer dollars going toward surgeries to normalize the confusion, but you also have taxpayer dollars funding the terror and the horror of these women as they also funnel men into women's prisons. I mean, it's really deplorable to think about. It's something that is immoral. It's something that's wicked to think about. And this article here just kind of points out that California leading the charge, is not alone. Also, you've got New York, you've got New Jersey, and you've got Washington all battling these issues because they have reduced the standard of separating men and women in the prison system. So there are more so-called trans women, which we know are men, who all they have to do is say this is what they feel. So some of them, according to reports, some of them are being transferred into women's cell blocks having full beards. Some of them are once violent criminals against women, and they're being transferred into women's general population.
Oh, man.
It is wicked to even think about. So you've got these prisoners now. There are lawsuits that are popping up because of some of the women waking up being assaulted by these men and not being defended, not being protected by the wardens. And even when the wardens report, hey, we've got an issue here, all of that's just kind of being glossed over. This is the type of world that people like Kamala Harris and all of her surrogates, all the people who stump for her, this is the kind of world that they want to live in. And this is the kind of world that they hope we will think is normal. That we will think, oh yeah, that's just the world that we live in. There's some information from this Daily Mail article that I thought was important, just kind of looking at some of the stories. And again, I want to warn you, this is not fun to talk about, but it bothers me when you've got people who attempt to kind of clean up their image because they can rile people up and they can speak with a Southern Black accent. And now all of a sudden it's vote for me. Like have you seen the clip? We're going to do it again in 24. Like,
Well,
oh,
you
my
told
God,
me about it. I didn't see it, but
it gets under my
that
skin.
is so like typical of the climate around elections. That there's a bending towards trying to be palatable or, gain a certain group that you feel like maybe I don't have secure or whatever it may be. But it's disgusting.
It is disgusting. So here are some of the stories. And again, listener, viewer discretion, please be careful if you've got littles. This is highly disturbing, right? But this is just a snippet because she's talking about what she has done and how she led the way, right? For prisoners in California being able to receive quote unquote, the surgeries or the medical help that they believe they needed. Please understand that when you start describing this as medical help, then you're also talking about, oh, we've got to make sure that they are in the population with which they identify so that their mental health also stays intact. Okay, so here we go. In May of 2022, you had a trans inmate. So this is a man who took a woman, a female inmate, into a portable toilet on the yard and violently sexually assaulted her, while other prisoners stood guard because they were told that they would be next if they did not. If they did not stand guard so that this violent attack could happen, they were going to be next. So you've got this happened in May of 2022. Then you've got these other high profile cases, according to the Daily Mail, including someone by the name of Raymel Blunt, a trans male to female detainee at Rikers Island, who goes by the name Diamond Blunt, who in February of 2022 raped an unsuspecting woman prisoner after she was showering. Guys, I know this is graphic to talk about, but this is what people like Kamala Harris and others who support this confusion want to normalize in our culture. They want to normalize this. And please, lest you think, oh, well, you're talking about a prison population, which I really question your humanity if you think that people, because they become prisoners, lose their humanity. These are people who are still made in the image of God, right? That's right. And so I don't think, last time I checked, we don't create these like hotbeds where there's just free for alls and we just don't care. Like we still have people who are human, right? We still have an opportunity. This is why we have things like prison fellowships where we have opportunity for the gospel to get to people so they can come to know Christ, right? I mean, let's remember Chuck Colson. Like, let's remember that he was reached with the gospel while in prison because he didn't lose his humanity. So for the people who like to check out, and which even if you do like to check out, I do believe that there's a way for us to look at what is going on here for those of us who are free, right? Who are not in a prison system. There's a way to look at what's going on that it's a threat to us as well. Because these ideologies are not contained in a prison system.
Right. They're not just going to stay there and only apply in those locations. This stuff is going to seep out into culture because this is what they want. This is how they want to live.
Yes.
And so when they're pushing these things and you say, well, that's in New York, that's in California, well, best believe it's going to be in where you are well. These things do not stay contained in certain locations.
No, it's coming to any town, USA. So just get ready. Any town, USA, any prison population, your local school. And we'll talk about that in just a second here. But here's more of this information when you talk about, Kamala Harris being proud of what she did in the California prison system as the Attorney General of California. A trans convict in Illinois, someone by the name of Andre Patterson, who goes by Janiyah Monroe, was accused of raping several women inmates in a female prison. Then you have another named Demi Minor, a trans. This is all in this article here. So we're talking about a man who was jailed for murdering his foster father, but then transferred to a women's prison where he then impregnated 2 female inmates. Listen, this is a level of wickedness that I think reveals the heart and the motivation behind the wicked people who think this is normal. Who think this is okay. And we're all supposed to turn away from it. We're all supposed to look away. We're not seeing what we think we're seeing. So here's where I think it's important to note, man, and I want to look at the Olympics here.
Yeah, because I was just going to say,
go ahead.
You talk about prison, but this stuff is already in the culture, in the form of the sports and things, and we'll talk about that. It's the same spirit. It's the same, I feel this way, so I'm going to go into this arena where there's all women, and I could be my best self. Like this stuff is not only in the prisons already. Yeah,
absolutely. And when you think about what this looks like, my goodness, how do I describe it? Like what it looks like. I don't want to say in a minor way because it is major what is happening. But I think when we think worst case scenario, you've got women who are being physically abused, physically assaulted. Then in our American school system, where you've got the Biden administration, and remember, Kamala Harris is Biden 2.0, if you want to say it that way, but probably worse,
Yeah.
right? Like I think to the extreme presentation of what they value is what you get with a Kamala Harris. So what does the Biden administration value? Well, they value the total reworking of Title IX protections, where you erase women in total and you make sex something that you just identify as. It's not immutable. It's not something that is according to your biology. It's according to your feelings. Well, what we see now happening all across the country is you've got state after state after state saying, we are not going to honor, we are not going to recognize these Title IX rules that have been revised by the Biden administration. Oklahoma, just a couple of days ago, became the 22nd state to block the new Title IX rules, which went into effect August 1st. So it's like back to school for kids, back to confusion. The Biden administration wanting to be the champions of confusion in the public school system, which again, shout out, look, it's another reason for you to pray about homeschooling your kids.
Yeah,
I know people get upset and they talk about it and it's, but look,
yeah.
what are you going to just continue to farm your kids out to this and hope that they come back and they're not affected by it?
Right. Look, I had a conversation recently just about that with a Christian parent. And I said, look, I used to go back and forth like, maybe this, you got now, look, this is the option. You need to pray about how to do it.
Mhm.
Like not if you should.
Yeah, that's
Christian
good.
parent, how to do it. Ask the Lord for some steps on how to be able to take your child out of this system that you can educate them at home. It's not a question of if we want to do that. If man, right now with all the things that's happening, I think we can clearly see that, man, this indoctrination, what they're trying to shove on our children,
Mhm.
the way that they desire for them to be raised up is against the knowledge of God.
Right.
And so it's not if, it's how. So start praying right now. How, Lord, can I do this? How
Mhm.
can I do this? Settle that in your heart, that it's not an if statement anymore. It's not if. It's not if, it's how.
Yeah, man, that's so good. And I think that's the place that we've got to get to. And I don't think that people see the urgency yet because they feel like,
I
well,
don't
our
see
kids are
how.
okay.
I don't see how.
And I think what they don't realize is sort of like the consistent and persistent pressing in on the hearts and the minds of our kids to rework how they think about God and whether or not what he says is true, whether or not what he says is good and right. And I think it's time for people to not be timid in the conversations that we're having. And I think it's just like what you said. It's not a question of if we should do it, but the question is how. What sacrifices do we make to bring our kids home so that we are not continuing to send them out to be trained in Babylon?
Working
right?
against what
Yeah.
you say you want in your child
Yeah.
by sending them out to Babylon. You're
Yeah.
working against what you're saying that you want them to be.
You can't justify that.
Okay.
Like I think about like trying to make that make sense and you just can't. Here's a story from the Daily Wire. This is Oklahoma joining 21 other states and blocking Biden's Title IX rules. A judge in Oklahoma blocked the Biden administration's guidelines that force public schools to allow trans-identifying males into girls' bathrooms, locker rooms, and sports. Oklahoma is now the 22nd state to block the new Title IX rules, which would redefine sex to include gender identity and sexuality. Since they were issued in April, courts in 8 districts have barred the regulations. The rules are set to take effect as of yesterday, August the 1st, for all states that have not received a preliminary injunction. Now, why are we doing this? Because we're attempting to clean up what we know is wicked. Why do we have to do this? But here's the thing. Do we want our kids to be subjected to whatever administration is in office? Like, do we want to say, okay, well, we dodged that one. This is, if we could just get him out of office. Okay, so, but the kids are quote unquote okay until they're not. Right? Until there's someone else who has an agenda, who has a desire, something they want to do. And so the question is then, what are we going to do as parents? And, man, I think about in the Olympics, we were talking about the opening ceremonies, right? Yeah. And we're talking about how, my goodness, it's so wicked and it's so vile. And there are people who are like, oh, you guys only saw what you wanted to see. And this is not something that is valued by the Olympics. And I go, but isn't it though? Isn't it though?
Right.
Because I read another article that talked about basically what the Olympics values. So they've got an Olympic Village, and they, house all of the athletes in these kind of like dorm type quarters. And what we know is that the Olympic Committee itself hands out condoms and things to normalize the kind of debaucherous, like just free for all that they presented in the opening ceremony. So this is the kind of world that those who hate God want to live in. And this is the kind of world that we have been invited to either participate in or ignore. You participate in it or you ignore it. Here's a story here. Okay, this is from the news outlet, The Athletic. Okay, what happens in the athletes' village stays in the village. That's what former Team USA Olympic swimmer Summer Sanders once said. Reading this article here. With the Paris Olympics in full swing, the sentiment might apply more than ever because this is the first games in 8 years where mingling and meetups can take place after the quote unquote intimacy ban and social distancing rules of the COVID-19 disrupted Tokyo Games back in 2021. With that in mind, listen to this. 200,000 male condoms, 20,000 female condoms, and 10,000 dental dams, which work to protect people during oral intimacy, sex. Okay. I'm trying to be very careful here and not be unnecessary, but this is the world that we live in.
Yeah.
This is the world that we live in. This is what, so when people look at the opening ceremonies and they're just like, oh my goodness, like, I can't believe that they are telling us what they value, not just in this country, because we think, well, the Americans should pull out but no, the Americans also value this as well.
Right.
But this is what is valued in the world and promote it. So it has become a tradition. It has become a tradition to hand out these condoms within the Olympic Village, according to this article that I read on The Athletic, that I thought, man, this is just what they value, right? So there are 14,500 athletes and staff staying at the Olympic Village during the Olympic Games. And so they hand out enough contraception or whatever to encourage and entice these athletes to just kind of live according to their whims, whatever you want to do. And the athletes even say that this is the normal expectation of how they are going to live during the Olympic Games.
Wow.
The idea that we're good people, the idea that, we're basically good, but they're flawed systems. No, we're bad and we make up the systems, right? And this is why we need someone from outside of us to change us from the inside out. But this is the world that they want to live in. This is what's normal. There's another story, and this, my goodness, just kind of blows my mind that you had a volleyball player, a beach volleyball player who was a registered sex offender playing in the Olympics. Again, people say registered sex offender playing in the Olympics, representing the Netherlands. So I don't understand why people make statements like, that's just a fluke. Like that's not who we are. No, but it is who we are. And you've got all of these stories that come out and show it's exactly who we are.
Yeah, definitely. And when you see these things, man, you got to also think from a spiritual standpoint. This is where the world is. This is sin makes you stupid. These type of things that we're talking about, because for there to even be a thought that this is okay in the minds of people, it shows that there's a spirit of stupor that's upon the world.
Yeah.
Yes, countries, but the world, because there's a collective thought of debauchery.
Yep.
And we have to stand as Christians, even when we look at our politics and say morality matters.
Yeah.
Morality matters. Even if the world is saying no, and there's some segments of the church that are even saying, hey, do people really care about that anymore? God cares.
Yes.
God
and we
cares
should too, because God cares, we should continue to care. That's our standard. Like that's our straight edge, Here's the article. A convicted child rapist and registered sex offender was booed on Sunday as he competed in beach volleyball at the Olympic Games.
He was booed. Wow.
And he should not have even been there.
No.
he was booed, yay, but he should not have even been there, right?
Yeah.
Steven van der Velde, a Dutch beach volleyball player on a team ranked 10th in the world, was sentenced to 4 years in prison back in 2016 after pleading guilty. Listen to this. After pleading guilty to raping a 12-year-old schoolgirl he met on Facebook. Now, at the time, he was 19 years old. He met this child on Facebook, then traveled from Amsterdam to England to drink alcohol with her, and then he raped her.
Oh.
Okay.
Wow.
He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of rape. Okay.
Wow.
So now the reason that he was arrested and charged was because he contacted her after he raped her to tell her that she should probably seek out the morning after pill. So when the 12-year-old went to her parents to inquire about the morning after pill, the parents were like, "What? Why do you need that? Why are you asking about that?" "Oh, well, this 19-year-old man traveled here that I met on Facebook," which, I've got major questions for the parents. Like, I can't even joke about that. Like, I've got major questions for the parents. But my point is this. You've got this man who is now 29 years old. He is married. He has a 2-year-old son. He is saying, okay, let me read his quote here, because this really blows my mind. He said, quote, "Everyone wants to be liked. Everyone wants to be respected. And with something like this on your record, it's difficult." This is what he said in a Dutch TV interview. Okay. He said, "I can't reverse it, so I have to carry the consequences. It's the biggest mistake of my life." The biggest mistake of my life. I mean, maybe you get a tattoo that you're like, probably shouldn't have put it on my face. You know what I mean? Like, maybe that's a big mistake. Traveling from Amsterdam to England to rape a 12-year-old child. I don't know that goes into the category of being a mistake.
Yeah, and I don't understand. I can't get past what are their laws, because why is this guy even like that's amazing.
So here's what's interesting, right? So he served, I want to say, a year prison sentence in England, but then when he was extradited back to the Netherlands, because they have a more relaxed approach to the age of consent, he served like a few months there and then was released. So he, did not really do the time for the crime that he committed. And there are people who are saying that he has been rehabilitated, that he made a mistake, and that he should be able to compete and represent his country. Well, but this is what his country values. So of course, his country is going to say that, yes, you can represent us. Okay. But the question is that of the Olympic Committee. Like, why is that something that so they say, well, he's not going to be in the Olympic Village. So he's not going to be with the other athletes.
It seems like they shouldn't care about that.
Like, why do you care? Like, what do you
just throw him in as well?
And so here's,
because
so here's the thing, because he is a registered pedophile. He is a registered pedophile. And he's saying that is not who he is. The Olympic Committee is saying, do you think we would do something that would make you unsafe? Like, we would not allow him to compete in the Olympic Games if we thought that it would put people at risk. Yeah, you would. Because that's what you value. That's the point that I'm making. So from the handing out of all of the condoms and normalizing the debauchery and all of the wickedness, the opening ceremonies really set the tone. The opening ceremonies, and by the way, they've been doing this, the Olympic Committee, they've been handing out condoms and turning the Olympic Village into a cesspool of debauchery since 1992. So they've been doing this for a long time. But this is how you know that a culture has so violently shifted away from God and we deserve what we get, is when you no longer try to hide what you're doing. So now it's open knowledge. It's openly celebrated. Right. This is something that people talk about high hand. Open rebellion
and
against God.
Let's not talk about the trafficking that we know go on at these type of events.
Yeah.
Like, that's something else. That's a whole nother level. That's even more. Look, man, we are here, and as believers, we have to stand on God's word. We have to stand boldly. We have to declare what He has said, because the world around us, they're doing what the world Normally does.
Right.
But what are we going to, where's the church? Where are we?
Yeah.
You know, and we have to make sure that we're in the right place.
Man, I want to say one more thing about the Olympics and about athletes and just thinking about the tough decisions that we have to make as parents and those who love Jesus. You know, the things that we desire for our kids, I think there are so many of us who could look at the Olympic Games and see that as the height of success for so many athletes and want our kids to be in those kinds of situations. But I think what God is calling us to is indeed what he's always called us to. And it's a distinction in this world. And when it becomes evident that we can no longer coexist, if you will, in a culture that is hostile to God and wants to demand that we participate, wants to force us to use certain pronouns, force us to normalize certain behavior, force us to celebrate what they celebrate and love what they love, then we have got to stand against that culture. And it's a tension. It's a tension because we want to reach people. We want them to come to know Christ, but we've got to refuse to participate. And so what I'm saying is that may mean for some of us that our highest goals and our highest aims for our kids in sports and athletics is not maybe that they make it to the Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe we say, I don't know that I want my kid to be immersed in this world where it's normalized rebellion against God.
Yeah.
But again, it is a world that they want to live in. And it's a world that they want us to live in and be willing to pay the price of admission.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's going to take some discernment, some wisdom on the part of parents. If you have children who are very athletic and have the potential to do that, they better be rooted and grounded in the word of God to be a witness. Amen. If they go to a place like that. Look, I know that, and I think that will be very rare.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think most parents, when we look at this, we have to say, okay, nah, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Unless you have specific instructions from the Lord that this person is going to be like a Tim Tebow and go in there and be able to represent, you know, like we can't play with this stuff.
And you can't lie to yourself.
You can't lie to yourself.
Can't lie to yourself.
Not
you know
because you
kids.
want your kid to excel in athletics. You can't lie to yourself if they're not ready to be a part of this Olympics or any other higher sport type,
right.
you know, thing. Like, man, come on. This is it. This isn't for all the marbles.
Yeah, this is for all the marbles. And I would say this, you know, we make tough decisions as parents. We make decisions not to be popular with our kids, but we make decisions to glorify God, to honor the Lord, and be ready to give them a reason. Be ready to give them a reason. Our kids may say, well, why can't I participate in that? I mean, we've made some tough decisions and we've said, no, you're not participating in that. You know, even having kids, hey, you'd be really good at this. You ever think about no, you're not going to participate in that. Why? Because we understand the strength of the pull of this world. And this is the world that we live in. And this is the world that they want. It's a normalized desire to rebel against God. One other story before we wrap up this podcast, so incredibly disturbing. Again, talking about the world that they long for, the world they want to live in, and why we can't stop talking about the perilous times that we are in. I know it sounds like a broken record, but this is where we are. We are in perilous times. We're in times that are confusing. We are in deceptive times where those who are not steeped in the word of God will be drawn away, will love this world so much that they could not imagine parting ways with it. Here is this from the Media Research Council. A Massachusetts bill would replace mother and father on birth certificates, citing legal parentage equality. Legal parentage equality. A new bill just passed the Massachusetts State Senate that would replace the words maternity and paternity on state birth certificates and within other state laws related to paternity with more inclusive gender-neutral language to appease the gender-bending alphabet mafia. Reading from this Media Research Council's article, Massachusetts House Bill 4750 would amend existing law, quote, to replace references to paternity with parentage and allow for the original issuance or amendment of birth certificates to include information related to the parentage of a child, to keep from offending people who don't, quote, identify with their biological gender, and to cater to gay couples who purchase children using sperm donors and surrogates. The bill replaces any mention of the term mother with the phrase person who gave birth and swaps out father for other parent.
Man, there's so much to say about that. like initially what comes to my mind is Daniel and his companions when they thrusted them into taken captive to Babylon. One of the things that they wanted to do was give them another language. They changed their names and want to give them another language.
Yeah.
This stuff, this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to give another way to, don't say, parent or mother or father. And that's too direct. That's too solid. We're going to say the one who gives birth and the other parent for father. That's another thing. That's another point. The dulling down and dumbing down of men.
Yeah.
The disrespect of men. Like it's like, really, there's so many things that when I think about the word of God, I think about Jeremiah, how he was preaching in Judah, that this is coming. This is what's happening in this country. It's happening in this country. And you see things happening like this in certain places. It's going to trickle. It's not staying in a localized area.
That's right.
So we have to be concerned about these things. We have to pray. We have to seek the Lord and ask him to fill us that we can be bold witnesses, because this stuff is not going to stop.
Yeah, language matters. To your point, it's an excellent one. Language matters, and what we are told to say, and even how we are told to say it really matters. And it comes down to, will we have an allegiance to Christ, or will we fold under the pressure of this world? I mean, not being able to say mom and dad or mother and father, and to be confused as to whether or not it's loving or unloving to use the language that God uses, that he has given us a mother and a father, and what he reveals about the heart of a mother and the heart of a father. All of these things have spiritual implications. And what we warn is that these things never happen in a vacuum.
Right.
They are intentional attacks, and they have spiritual implications. These attacks all do. I mean, when you think of the fact that we can't say father anymore, you may still be able to say mother, but that you can't say father, that it just seems, it seems too, what's the, white male power to say father, or to identify the roles of a father. This is the world that they long for, and it's the world that they want us to live in. We must not live in it. Right. We must not. And what I mean when I say live in it, go to them and seek to dwell in their world. We understand that physically we have to be in this world, but the Lord teaches us very plainly that we are not of it, that we exist in this constant tension. And that means that we're going to have to make some tough decisions going forward about the things that we do and don't participate in, the things that we do and don't agree with. This is the world they want to live in. This is the world they've invited us to participate in. We've got to say no. And I want to say this one other thing. I'm reading through the book of Isaiah, and I'm reading the indictment that the Lord brings against a people who know him, that he has revealed himself to them, and yet they reject him. They reject him. And then they go after things that are foolish. I mean, the Lord says, man, you've got this piece of wood that you use the wood. Some of the wood you use to make a fire to cook on so that you can warm yourself by it even.
Right.
Some of the wood you carve out and you make a statue, and the same wood, then you worship the wood. And God is like really, like, that's foolish.
Yeah.
That is foolishness. Yeah. And God says that he has revealed himself. And I would say, look, to us living in 21st century America, God has revealed himself to us. We know exactly who he is. Man is without excuse. And so while we are not out in the woods carving out idols, there are idols in our culture that demand our worship and demand our allegiance. They demand that we use their terms. They demand that we speak the way they speak and say what they say in agreement with their rebellion against God. And we've got to stand against it. We just cannot do it. I'll say one other thing here. We were at summer camp, and there were several questions about relationships and dating. And a couple people said, spoke in terms of like, so a partner. And I said, can I just say, let's maybe stay away from the word partner, because it is one of those demanded linguistic acrobatics, right? That has been used and normalized so that you don't have to identify the sex of an individual, right? So you no longer say husband or wife, you say partner, because you don't want to offend people who don't identify as a husband or a wife. Right. So even the term, and I don't like boyfriend, girlfriend when talking about young kids. So I just will say that. But even now, our young kids are no longer saying boyfriend or girlfriend. They're saying partner. Why? Because they have been taught to say that.
Indoctrination.
And so what's the fruit of that indoctrination? Full converts. Full converts. They don't even know it. So, but this is why we show up. We show up to say, hey, listen, I know that you hear people saying partner, and it seems that that's the culturally relevant term to use, but I want you to know it has at its core the erasure of the sexes, that there's male and there's female, and that anybody who exists in the category of being in a relationship with someone, they still fall into that category, either male or female. So don't fall for the lie that you just refer to someone as a partner so that you don't offend them. I know that's small. I know it's small, but it has far-reaching effects because it has indoctrinated us. It has told us a way to think. It has given us new language. It's given us new language, new vocabulary, in making, I would say, Babylonians.
Look, I'm just thinking about that, man, Lord. Like when Nebuchadnezzar, took them captive, it was a 3-year indoctrination program. And it was going to attack their identity because their name was going to be changed, their identity. Because in the Hebrew, culture, that name means something. So we're going to change your name, new identity. We're going to indoctrinate you in the history and the language of the Chaldeans, so it's going to be like your language. But then also it was what they were going to take in, what they were going to eat, which they stood against, because I think that there was some things to the gods that they were, want to worship with this food and stuff like that. But man, it was an all-out assault. It's the same way. It's the same. It's a similar thing happening in this country where identity is being, challenged, given another language, and as an assault, on individuals. It's like, and you made the point. That whole thing when they were saying partners, a couple of people were saying it at the camp. It stuck out to me in my mind. As soon as I heard it, I was like, "What
partner?"
Because that's going away from what we've been given, like
male and female distinction, husband, wife.
And man, we have to be able to see that and speak to it. See that and be able to speak to it right where it is, call it out, because those are the things that inch by inch and make these encroachments. And before you know it, we have our children saying that stuff.
Yeah, man, listen, we've got to cultivate boldness in our kids, especially as we see the wickedness increase in the world. We've got to cultivate boldness in our kids, and we've got to make sure first and foremost that they recognize that Jesus is worthy, that they should suffer with him, that they will be ostracized. Like, this is not a popular message, but it's worth talking about. Like, this is the world. Like, take all of these things together. Don't just read an article here, read an article there, and then kind of get back on with life, but put all of these things together in one picture where God is allowing us to see the type of world that these people want to live in. This is absolutely 100% what they desire. And it is a world that has said no to God. It is a world that has rejected God. And again, maybe a follow-up here, but as I read through the book of Isaiah, the Lord reveals the hearts of man. And as man wants to turn from God, reject God, there's a hubris and an arrogance of man that he thinks that he is like God, right? And God judges that. And so we want to be as far away from that as possible. We want to agree with God about who he says he is. He has already made known to us who he is, and he's also made known to us what he requires. And so we want to agree with him. We want to say yes and amen. When we resist those cultural trends that rival the truth, we remain culture proof. Until next time, Lord willing.
God bless.